Okay, well, hello everybody. Welcome to the UC Center Sacramento Speaker Series. I'm Richard Kravitz, UCCS Director, and it's great to see all of you here. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention once again, and remind our audience that we do have a full slate of summer programming scheduled, including over the next 3 weeks, talks on stress and health disparities in adolescence. That's on July 7th. One on acid-based approaches to support multilingual learners in science classrooms. So that's asset-based as opposed to challenge or deficit-based. And finally, on July 21st, climate change and California's coastline, so something a little different. And these talks will feature faculty from across the UC system, including the Davis, Santa Cruz, Santa Barbara, and Irvine campuses. So now a few words about our featured guest today. So Dr. Joseph I Castro is the recently appointed 8th Chancellor of the California State University, the nation's largest and most diverse public four-year university. And he's also the first Mexican-American and Native Californian to serve in that role. Prior to becoming Chancellor, Dr. Castro was an eminent scholar of higher education leadership and served as president of Fresno State for nearly 8 years. He also has a distinguished University of California pedigree, having worked as in the University of California system for 23 years, holding positions including Vice Chancellor of Student Academic Affairs at UC San Francisco, and positions at 4 other UC campuses, Berkeley, Davis, Merced, and Santa Barbara. Chancellor Castro is nationally recognized as a proponent of innovative student success measures, a champion of educational equity in all its dimensions, and a leader in supporting students' basic needs. I personally had the privilege of hearing Chancellor Castro discuss the impact of COVID-19 on free speech on university campuses last November. He's a thoughtful leader, not afraid to take on some of the toughest issues of our time. And so it's a pleasure to welcome him here. Just a word about format. We will invite Chancellor Castro to make some opening remarks, followed by a conversation about his professional journey, his reactions to the new job at CSU, and his thoughts on some of the challenges facing higher education. And this will be followed by audience questions, which our staff will handle through the Q&A function on Zoom. So if you have questions, please type them in to the Q&A function, and we'll take as many as we can. And so without further ado, Chancellor Castro, welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kravitz, and good afternoon to all of you. It's great to be with you today. I understand I have some friends and former colleagues there, and I'm happy to reconnect with you this way and with all of you, all the students and faculty and staff and friends of the UC Center. In a way, it feels like returning home. I was mentioning to Dr. Kravitz that my first job was working in Sacramento after my education at Berkeley at the UC Center there, UC Office of Government Relations. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here, Dr. Kravitz. And as you mentioned, I am a proud product of the University of California. It was really as a student at Berkeley that I first developed my own passion for leadership, and especially for educational leadership. And that passion only grew during the 23 years that I had the privilege of serving as a faculty member and or an administrator at each of the 5 UC campuses and also the Office of the President. So thank you again for this opportunity to speak today. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge you and commend you, Dr. Kravitz, and everyone associated with the UC Center for all that you do to provide undergraduate and graduate students with invaluable experiential learning and professional development opportunities in our state's capital, in addition to making significant contributions to knowledge-based policymaking by bringing important UC research to the governors and legislative offices, as well as critical state agencies. And please accept my gratitude and appreciation and congratulations for such vital and effective work there in the Capitol. Well, I mentioned a moment ago that this feels a little bit like a homecoming to me. I understand that I'm new to many of you, so I thought I'd just begin my remarks today, and they'll be brief because I love the dialogue that comes from this opportunity, but I'll share a few words about my own background. As Dr. Kravitz noted, I am the first Mexican-American and first Native Californian to serve as California State University's chancellor. And that was surprising to me that I'd be the first Native Californian of the California State University, but it is true. And it's also a great honor and a source of pride and extraordinarily humbling. My great grandfather actually came to the United States from Mexico almost a century ago to help build California's railroad. And he and his family lived in tents as they traveled up and down the state. My grandfather remembered that experience vividly and frequently told me stories of those times going throughout the valley when he was a boy. In fact, he went to kindergarten just down the road from UC Merced, where I helped, to build that campus. So it's quite meaningful to be part of that project. My family eventually settled in a small town called Hanford in the San Joaquin Valley. And I was raised by my grandparents who were farm workers earlier in their lives. And then my single mom, who was a beautician. And they worked really hard, just like so many other parents. They dreamt of a bright future for me and for my sister. And certainly they had the intelligence and drive to succeed in college, but they never had the opportunity. But thanks to their hard work and resolve, I did. And I know so many students in the UC and CSU understand that firsthand. I attended UC Berkeley as part of a program that was started by then Chancellor Mike Heyman, and Pat Hayashi was part of it. He might be tuning in today, and I just want to thank him for his role, because without that program, which provided opportunities to students from the Central Valley from modest means, I'd have never been able to go to the University of California. And it was there that I began to see my own life transformed through my college experience and discovered a passion for leadership, which has become my life's work. And throughout my career, and especially the past 7+ years, during which I had the honor of serving at home as president of Fresno State, I've seen higher education transform the lives of so many talented and diverse students who grew up in circumstances similar to my own, students like so many of you listening today. And that's why I am deeply inspired to now serve as the Chancellor of CSU, with the opportunity to continue to positively impact lives on a scale that really only the CSU can provide as the nation's largest and most ethnically and economically diverse public university. And it's my life's highest professional honor and responsibility. So today, 6 months into my tenure, my overarching priorities remain unchanged from those I outlined in my first days as Chancellor. And I'll do that briefly, Dr. Kravitz, and then I'll stop and I'll be happy to engage in dialogue. But first and foremost is to advance student success and educational equity in all its dimensions, so that all students, regardless of background, economic circumstance, race, ethnicity, ability, identity, and orientation, have the equal opportunity to graduate in a timely manner and earn the lifelong benefits of a high-quality college degree. And then second, to continue to diversify the CSU's leadership, faculty, and staff to better reflect the talented and diverse students that we serve. Third, to better leverage technology to expand access to current and new populations of students and adult learners, and to strengthen pathways between the higher education segments and from high school to college. And then also to inspire the support of our partners in Sacramento, where so many of you are, and Washington, D.C. as well as our friends and philanthropists and our global alumni base, which I'm proud to say just reached a significant milestone, is now 4 million strong, 4 million strong, which happens to be larger than the population of 23 US states. And I really want to fire that base of support up and find ways for our alumni to contribute, to share their experiences, and benefit from connecting with their alma mater. And then more immediately, of course, is to help facilitate a successful transition to a dynamic post-pandemic university. So those are my highest priorities. I'm excited about the opportunity to engage with you today, and look forward to your questions and your feedback. And I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Kravitz. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Chancellor Castro. We're just so delighted to have you, and are really gratified that you are willing to share this time with us. My first question was going to be about your personal and professional journey. You covered a lot of that, but I wanted to ask you, many California high school students still are unable to pursue a 4-year college education, in part because they don't feel that they can, or they don't feel like they're adequately prepared. What was it in your background, family background, high school teachers, or whatnot, that you feel got you ready to make the leap and to go to UC Berkeley?
Thank you. Well, that's a long story that I'll shorten, but if it wasn't for one particular counselor who was at my high school, who said to me one day, "Have you ever thought about going to the University of California, Berkeley?" And my answer to that question at that time was no. I hadn't even imagined that that would be possible. And that is true for so many students who really don't understand the landscape because they come from families that have not yet benefited from higher education. So my own children would have answered that question very differently than I did. But at the time, I said, "Are you kidding?" And I went home that night and talked to my mother. And thankfully, my mother was ahead of her time in terms of being open to different ideas. And she said, "Why not? Let's go learn more." And I went to the Ted Wills Center in Fresno with some other students from the Valley, maybe 100 of us. And I had no idea that we were going to be admitted on the spot that day, but that's what happened to me. And that was an amazing gift. The woman stamped admitted on my application on that day, and changed my whole life. So if it hadn't been for that counselor, if it hadn't been for that program, I would have taken a different path. And I don't know where that path would have taken me, but I don't think I'd be sitting here right now talking to you, Dr. Kravitz.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting story, because it illustrates the power of one person on the one hand, and also the importance of systematic programs and processes to facilitate progress for people who might not otherwise have a chance. So
Absolutely. I actually had a chance to thank Chancellor Emeritus Heyman later in his life. I was already working for the University of California, and I told him this story. And I said, that really showed me that leadership matters, because he and others at the University of California at that time said, we need geographic diversity. We need diversity of all kinds. And if it wasn't for that sort of approach, I may not have ever had an opportunity like that. So I keep that in mind now as chancellor, as president, in my other positions. How can I create more opportunities, not create barriers, but create opportunities so that more people from all backgrounds can succeed, especially those who are first in their families.
Yeah, so maybe later in our discussion, we can circle back to your ideas about how UC and CSU can work more effectively with high schools to make these kind of stories even more common.
Sure.
But you mentioned you're about 6 months into your new job as chancellor. Could you tell us a bit about the transition, or a bit more about the transition? What's been especially rewarding, challenging, or surprising about the job?
Well, I have to say, changing jobs in amidst a pandemic, a global pandemic, not easy at all. And you become part of a new organization, and the people that you're working with, even today, I'm seeing more of them now, but before it was all on Zoom like this. Thankfully, I had been a president in this system and had built relationships with a lot of the people that I serve with now. So I think had I not been in that position, it would have been so much harder if I'd come from another state or another system to be able to integrate like this during a very challenging time where the stakes are so high in terms of decisions. So very challenging, not unlike the transition that I talked about before from high school to UC Berkeley. I was looking back going, when have I felt like I've grown as much in a transition? And I think it was, I'd go back to that one because, I came here at the end of December. This building had been mothballed for at least 7-8 months, maybe more. And no one was here. And then I started to get a few people to come, but it is a very interesting process. I've learned a lot. There is no rule book for leadership during a pandemic. So a lot of it is trying to stay true to your values and the mission of the system, but being flexible around the tactics. I think that's been one of my core lessons during this transition. And I've been fortunate. I work with a lot of great staff here, and each of the 23 presidents have been very, very helpful and supportive.
You're familiar, of course, intimately familiar with the UC system as well as CSU. And
yes,
I wonder if you could share with us some of your insights on the relationship between the central office, UCOP in UC's case, and your office and CSU's, and the periphery, if you will, the campuses where the teaching and scholarship actually gets accomplished.
Yeah.
And how do you strike the right balance between central control and local flexibility?
Those are very important questions. I learned a lot about these kinds of questions and issues when I served in the University of California. I was very fortunate to serve at 5 different campuses, different cultures. Even though they all had the UC affiliation, they were very different in terms of how they functioned. And I learned a lot about different cultures. I mean, if you were to say, compare Santa Barbara to San Francisco, very different cultures. And trying to navigate those kinds of cultures to do things that you're supposed to do. And in my case, it was always around trying to expand opportunities for our students and help them to succeed regardless of the title or position. So I learned a lot through those experiences, and to be part of the founding of UC Merced. There had not been a UC campus started, since the late 60s. And that was such an incredible experience. When people ask me what it felt like, the best way I could describe it is it's like being on your favorite amusement park ride every single day. And it felt like that. And at one point I was like, okay, I think I'm going to take a break from this ride and do something else. But it was a really incredible, very deeply meaningful experience. And then I started my career in Sacramento working for Steve Arditi and an amazing group of colleagues there. And I learned so much about policy and politics. And so as chancellor today, I feel very comfortable working in these areas. That's one of my primary responsibilities, is to represent us in Sacramento. So I've gotten to know just about every member of the legislature and the governor and his team and the staff there. And I've been very impressed with their level of engagement around higher education and their commitment to the CSU. So in terms of system support, I view that as being one of my primary responsibilities. Also in Washington, D.C., so I spent a lot of time there. I work with a really great board, very supportive, from the board chair, Lily Kimbell, to each of the members. And so there's time talking with them, listening to their ideas. They really understand their role of support and guidance, and I very much appreciated that. So I have an important role to play there. And then I knew this as president. When I needed some advice or sounding board, I knew I could contact Chancellor White and he would be there. And I really tried to make myself accessible to the presidents. And there are 23 of them. And on any one day, I probably speak to 3, 4, 5 or more. And then we meet regularly on Zoom as well. So there is a part of my job which is about supporting them and advising, guiding, listening, those kinds of things. And then I have a great team here that I work with that tries to empower the campuses and support them and remove barriers. Of course, there are accountability features in our system, and we have to play that role as well. But I have found that the most powerful role that we can play is empowering, supporting the campuses. And that's the philosophy that I learned about in the UC, and I've tried to carry through in the CSU, even though they're different systems.
You talked earlier about diversity, equity, and inclusion as a core value and a focus for you as chancellor. And I wondered if you could expand on that a little bit, not only from your experience as a public figure, but from your own lived experience as someone who, for whom these values are so central. Why is DEI among your top priorities?
Well, I think the answer is in both the names of our systems, of the University of California and California State University. Could say the same for the California community colleges. So I want the CSU to reflect California in all ways. And we certainly do very well in that regard with respect to students. In terms of access and support, we have more to do, of course, but I very much want to focus more attention on accelerating the diversity of our faculty and some of our staff and also administrators. And the reason why I think that's important is the lived experiences in part. As someone who's first in their family go to college, I understand how that experience can be. I understand what it's like to deal with basic needs challenges, with financial aid challenges. Culturally, I come from a certain background, and that helps me understand the background of other students. So I'd very much like to see talented leaders from all different backgrounds in the CSU, because my view is that will strengthen us, that will inspire more students to do well. I've used this example before, but I'll share it with you, Dr. Kravitz. I have a 10-year-old son, and he was in school online for most of the year, like so many other students. And it would have been possible for him to not do well during this year, but he actually had his best year ever. And I think it's because of his teacher. His teacher just sparked this incredible level of engagement in him. And his teacher happens to be the only male of color in the school that he attended in Fresno, California, which is quite a diverse school. And so that's just another reaffirmation for me of how important it is to have educators who are role models, who will bring out the best in our talented and diverse students. So that's why I care about it. The inclusiveness is so important as well, because even if we are represented physically, are we doing everything we can to ensure that everyone thrives? And so the equity and inclusiveness parts of this are so vitally important from a policy perspective, from practices that we have, from professional development and support, the whole range of ways in which we model what a diverse, equitable, inclusive university would look like.
Yeah, a couple of follow-ups to that.
Sure.
You mentioned identifying talented students, and as you know, as one thing that we need to work harder at, and to identify talent wherever it resides, with as little bias and with as broad a lens as possible. And as you probably know, University of California has dropped the SAT, at least temporarily, as a requirement. What are your views on how to best identify talent where it lies? Because it certainly lies in places that we're not looking very hard right now, but how do we do that?
Household, I lived in public housing for a while. The profile that I had growing up, some people might say, well, he's not very talented, but I was given that chance. And I know that there are students from very difficult backgrounds that we may not have reached yet. And I'm eager to do that. And I've been part of different efforts in the University of California that did that at the undergraduate level, that did it at the graduate level. I worked at the Goldman School of Public Policy for a while, and we had a national program that I had been part of as a student to diversify that field. And we did a whole array of different things to change the composition of that field. We see that so dramatically different today than we did even when I was a student in that field. So it's possible to make progress. It just requires sustainable programs, great people, resources, good strategies, openness to collaboration, because no one institution can do it on their own. And that's why, President Drake and I meet on a regular basis with Chancellor Oakley, and we talk about ways in which we can work together. And that is so important, not just for our systems and who we serve, but for California, because we're part of a larger ecosystem. It's really important that we talk about these things, coordinate our plans the best we can, and work together on behalf of the state.
Well, I certainly want to talk some more about opportunities for intersystem collaboration in a minute,
Sure.
but you mentioned twice the power of individual teachers or counselors to transform lives, a counselor in your case, and a teacher in your son's case. CSU, of course, prepares a huge number of teachers for our state.
We do.
What is CSU doing to, what are you thinking about in terms of teacher preparation and teacher support, so that we have more such people who can go out there and inspire the next generation, without whom, we're lost?
Absolutely. We have some incredibly talented faculty across the CSU in this area. We educate about half of the graduates with credentials, and it's quite a diverse population. Coming from Fresno, I participated in those programs. I was on that faculty, and the composition of those students really reflected the region that we serve there in the Central Valley. And CSU does that as a whole through all of its campuses. I think the main challenge right now with the pandemic especially is that we're going to need to prepare more teachers. And there is interest in Sacramento in seeing us do that. And I'm certainly open to that. I think that's a way that CSU can contribute in even more significant ways. And because of our diverse student body, it will mean that we'll have more diverse teachers. I would like to see, I want to make a point of this, I would like to see more African-American students going into education, especially men. We just have a dearth of men of color in education. And boy, if we could somehow figure out how to solve that particular problem or address that challenge, I do think that we'll see extraordinary achievement among more of our students. So we've got to figure out how to do that more effectively.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, switching to a somewhat controversial topic, as you know, across the country, there's been calls for defunding, disarming, and even abolishing police departments, including on university campuses. So I know this has been raised by CSU students as well. And what's your position on this issue?
Thank you. Well, I've been listening carefully to the students that I serve, especially the student leaders. And what I'm trying to understand is what their most significant concerns are. And the conclusion that I'm drawing so far, and I'm still learning and processing this, but I believe that all of us want to be safe on the campuses. There's no question about that. Students want to be safe, faculty, staff, our alumni who visit want to be safe. But there does appear to be a disconnect in some cases between the police departments and those they serve. And I think it does relate to some of the questions that we've been asking, throughout our society. And especially in light of the murder of George Floyd, a whole lot of other questions about how police may be causing more difficulties than not. I don't believe that's the case on our campuses. I think there have been some isolated examples of problems. So the path that I'm focused on with my colleagues and with the support of our student leaders is to create advisory groups at each of the 23 campuses that really enable the police department to come together with students, faculty, staff, community members to talk through these issues. And I believe that communication is going to lead us to a different place. And I'll certainly hold accountable, our system will hold accountable officers that don't do their jobs appropriately. But again, I'm not seeing that as a particular pattern within the system. I'm viewing it more as about communication and working together and building a stronger bond. And so that's what we're focused on now at each of the campuses, is creating these groups that enable the opportunity to discuss these issues and hopefully try to resolve them. And I'm going to keep a close eye on those things. And if we need to do other things, we will do that. Our police officers already embrace the Obama report on 21st century policing, and they carry videos with them. They're banning, different chokeholds that existed before. So I feel like we've made some good progress, but I'm going to keep my ears and eyes open, and I very much want to make sure that we are serving the needs of our students, faculty, and staff going forward.
Yeah, well, you mentioned safety, and if students are like communities at large, at least according to the national polling I'm familiar with, people want to be safe from the police, but they also want to be safe from crime against both property and persons. So it is a tough balance sometimes to reach, and we need creative solutions for that.
Yeah, and President Drake and I have talked about this issue as well. We've had our chiefs talk to each other. I think that is another area where we can work together, learn from each other, and share best practices.
Yeah. Well, as a final question before we turn it over to the studio audience, you mentioned technology earlier. What are CSU's plans for leveraging what you've learned during the pandemic in terms of technology and moving forward to a continued technological age? What's the role of technology in higher education?
We learned a lot. We have learned a lot during the pandemic about the benefits of technology. And, what I hear from student leaders across our system is that they actually appreciated the benefits of online education, the freedom to do it, whenever they could. But they didn't like being locked up in their bedrooms. And I totally get that. So what I'm hearing from them is that they're going to welcome more opportunities for online education. But they might decide where they want to be, co-op space. They might even do it on campus. For some students, doing it at home is better for them because they may have children or elderly family members to take care of, or transportation could be an issue for them if they're in a rural area. So my feeling is that we want to leverage what we've learned. Our faculty have really embraced. I know you're part of the UC, and we've all learned a lot. I love the way our CSU faculty have embraced professional development in this area to learn more about how to teach effectively. And some have said to me, I'm actually more effective in that mode than I used to be. And so there's all sorts of different opportunities that arise. And I believe that we're going to have significantly more online education after the pandemic is over than we did before the pandemic. And it will, in the end, depend on, what the students are saying and what they want and how the faculty will respond. But it also is important to make sure that our students have access to quality learning devices and to broadband technology, so that there's not a digital divide. And we're getting ready to announce a new initiative that would be one of the largest in the country to have all students eventually in the CSU. It would give them access to that quality device. And I think that's going to make a huge difference because there's been some unevenness in our system. At Fresno State, we had a program where 18,000 of our students had these devices, in this case, Apple iPads, and they loved them. And it really helped us with eliminating the digital divide.
I've got to say, though, that's something you mentioned brought to mind that for many of our UC students, we've noticed that even if they have the equipment to access the internet, sometimes they don't have the private, quiet space that they need in order to participate in class. And you were talking earlier about maybe some kind of collective space or whatever, and that's certainly something universities might consider. Bringing back WeWorks for the public good.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. That's what I've heard from student leaders is cooperative spaces. Some of them were created informally over the last several months in places like Fullerton. Some of our students there just started getting together. They had been vaccinated and they were tired of being by themselves and they wanted to study together. And so they created their own spaces. And yeah, I think there are going to be lots of different ways to serve needs. And it will require us, I believe, to make sure our services that we offer are going to be both in person and available online, because there are a lot of students that I hear from, and I hear from their parents as well. They are going to beeline it right to the campus, and they're going to want all their courses on the campus. So there will be there'll be a variety, and I think we have to be ready for that and to help our students thrive by meeting them where they're at.
Flexibility remains a virtue. So,
absolutely.
Well, great. I see there's a bunch of audience questions lined up.
Great.
I think we'll turn it over to Sue and Sandra now. I believe we have some questions from our students to be followed by questions from other members of the audience.
Terrific.